Right, so more about 6 Feet Under. When you were writing sitcoms, did you really want to get into dramas? Was it calling you?
I didn't really think about that. I mean, I was just, even when I developed my own show, the first one I did was a sitcom because I just thought I'm a sitcom writer, It wasn't until American Beauty and I think American Beauty helped me realize I much prefer single camera storytelling. For me, I think I'm a better single camera writer than I am a 4-camera writer. So at the time I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to write dramas. But I guess, probably watching that first season of The Sopranos also sort of said to me, a show can be a drama, but it can also be darkly, darkly funny. And that's sort of where my voice lies anyway, I think.
So can you describe that drama for us on the show?
The Sopranos?
Oh, no, on your show, on 6 Feet Under.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, 6 Feet Under is it's a drama. But there's certainly a lot of humor and dark humor and gallows humor. I mean, I think I just can't. Humor is such a ingrained part of my worldview. I couldn't write something if it didn't have a laugh in it, because I think laughter is a real survival necessity to be alive. I think you have to be able to laugh, and you have to be able to find the humor where you can. It doesn't mean that things aren't meaningful or they don't affect you, or that irony is the only way of seeing the world. But otherwise it's too depressing, and especially on a show about 6 Feet Under, which is about peering into that existential abyss. And people who do that on a daily basis, you gotta lighten it up.
And how did you handle blending the reality, the fantasy, the flashbacks? There was a lot going on there. How did you do that?
I never really think in terms of how are we going to do that. It just happens organically in the storytelling. It's just an organic thing. If it feels right, do it. Is it serving the story at this point? How is it serving the story? Is it allowing a character to articulate their deepest fears or things that maybe they can't come out and articulate? Is like all of a sudden seeing your dead father and him saying something really nasty to you? Is that's showing something that's going on in the psyche of the perceiver. It's just organic. It just felt organic.
And did you have a lot of freedom working with HBO? Was there ever any network interference?
I had a tremendous amount of freedom, and I do on True Blood as well. And I have to say, one of my favorite things about working for HBO is that all the networks say we want distinct voices, we want unique voices. But when it comes right down to it, most of them want something that resembles something that has already been successful, because they're so scared, HBO really does want individual, unique voices, and they give you free rein, I mean, I've had occasional moments where I've heard things like that goes a little too far. When Tara bites his neck and she pulls out that big string of flesh, can we maybe cut that? But they're never saying like change the content, make it safer. But again, it's different because the ultimate purpose of network programming is to deliver the advertising. The ultimate purpose of premium cable programming is to tell the story. It's the product in and of itself. Whereas on the networks, it's all about keeping you in the seat and putting you in a frame of mind so that the advertisements will impact and imprint and leave a message, fundamentally.
Is there a 6 Feet Under character that you preferred writing for?
Well, I loved writing for David. I loved writing for Nate. The kids, the 3 kids, yeah.
And were any of the actors involved in the writing process at all?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, they would come to me at the beginning of the season. I'd say, here's what's going on with your character. And occasionally they would ask questions. But no, I feel like their job is to act and my job is to write. In fact, I remember one of the actors said, I'd like to write a script sometime. And I felt like saying, yeah, I'd like to play your part in an episode. It's not easy to write a script any easier than it is to do what you do, you know.
Did you have a Bible that sort of mapped out the series from the
No.
beginning to the end?
I had no idea. Basically, what I did with the pilot was I tried to open as many doors as I possibly could, but I had no idea where it was going. Mm-mm.
And could you describe for us a typical production week on the show?
A production week on 6 Feet Under?
Yeah.
Well, you know, when you do multi-episode shows, you're always, once you get into the swing of things, you're in prep for something, you're shooting something, and you're in post for something. So there would be shooting every day on the stage. There would be production meetings, casting, notes calls with HBO, editing, sound mix, scoring. It's pretty constant, and I think one of the good things about the way the writers serve as producers of their episodes is I get to have a big picture, you know, and I'm not so involved with what's going on the stage. You know, I'll come down to the stage if I'm called down, if it's necessary, or if it's my episode, then I'll be the producer on set. But a typical production week there's a lot going on.
So let's talk a little bit about the casting process.
Mm-hmm.
Who did you cast first?
For 6 Feet?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember.
It's such an ensemble show. You really had to sort of cast them all at the same time, I would assume. Sort of.
Yeah. I think I really don't remember who we cast first, honestly.
And none of them really look all that related. Like, you wouldn't necessarily see any family resemblance. Or did you think about that when you were casting, or was it just important to you to get
You know, what's important to
actors?
me is the best actor. What's important to me is somebody comes in and reads, and the script comes to life. And if somebody comes in and reads and brings the script to life in a way that will surprise me or something I didn't think of, that's the person I'm gonna go for. Yeah, in terms of, I feel like they look enough like they could be a family, but obviously the important thing is, does that character jump off the page, and do I see a person? Do I see a person with hopes and dreams and frustrations and disappointments, and do I see that character living in front of me?
Yeah. And they have the potential to be fairly unlikable people. So how did you get those characters to be so endearing?
Well, I think one thing you have to do is you have to love the character as a writer, no matter what they do. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, well, today I'm going to be evil. I'm going to be the most evil person I can be. It comes out of pain. It comes out of whatever happened to them. It comes out of fear. It comes out of ignorance. And that's what's interesting to me as drama. You know, you go back to like the first stories that were told, you know, myths. People did horrible things. They ate their children. People did horrible things. And I think what interests me as a writer, as a storyteller, is how can I shed some light on why this person is behaving the way do. Because I think when you see the world in terms of heroes and villains, that's really dangerous. That's really dangerous. That's the root of racism. That's the root of wars. You know, we should be beyond that. So what's interesting to me is to see characters in moments where they do make the bad decision, where they do something that is going to impact others negatively, and to somehow understand why they did that. It doesn't mean you have to approve of it, but you end up not hating the character. And so I think I always try to not judge the characters, because I don't think it's the job of the script or of the movie or of the show itself to judge its characters. Look for that humanity. Look for that glimmer of something in them that makes you feel compassionate, no matter what they do. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. So let's just talk about each of the main characters, if you could describe them and sort of tell how they evolved over the course of the series. Mm-hmm. So we'll start with Nate.
Nate was originally kind of like the Marilyn Munster. He was supposed to be like the normal guy surrounded by these freaks. And he was a bit of a, he was a bit of a Peter Pan. He was running from responsibility. He was running from mortality. He had a tremendous amount of natural charm that he coasted by for most of his life. And then this thing happens where he's given the responsibility of running this funeral home, and it sort of made him grow up and made him confront a lot of things and made him realize how precious life was, which is something nice to realize before you die. Of course he was always going to die. Of course.
When did you know he was going to die?
I knew from the beginning that he would die prior to the end of the show. Because if a show about, they all died at the end of the show, but I knew that this is a show about death. This is a show about accepting death. And of course it's going to happen to him. Right. Yeah. I mean, in the very first season, he says something about a headache, and that was all intentional.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how about David?
David is the archetypal good little boy who does everything right so that everybody will approve of him and love him because he doesn't love himself. In his case, it's because he feels like he's less than because he's gay, because that's a message that it's pretty impossible to escape growing up gay in America, unless you have amazing parents, which David did not. And his journey was a journey of self-acceptance and acceptance of others. It's not until you really accept yourself that you can accept other people.
And Ruth.
Ruth is a woman who at a very, at a later point in her life, suddenly no longer has the structure that gave her life meaning up until that point. My mom told me once, for almost 40 years, she had a husband or children to take care of. And then when that was gone, it was like, what do I do? What do I do? Who am I? And that was Ruth, and sort of having at this point later in life to say, like, who am I? Who is the person that I want to be?
Tell us about Claire.
Claire's the artist. Claire's the one who has a story to tell and who has a need to express herself and who loves her family and her origins deeply, but also knows she has got to get out of there, and she's got to get out of there as soon as she can.
And Brenda?
Brenda is a really fascinating character who grew up with two highly intelligent, highly articulate therapists. So from day one, her behavior was explained to her. And I think Brenda was basically conditioned to be a narcissist, conditioned to look at every single thing she thinks or feels and what does it mean. And I think at some point she just had to break free of that. And that's what the sexual compulsion was about. It's just about feeling. I don't want to think. I don't want to think. I just want to feel. And she came out of that on the other side and actually, you know, I think grew up and kind of became a very functioning being. She starts out as pretty much as a borderline personality. And, but I think she is, you know, she took charge of that and said, this is not what I want to be. I am going to be more than my conditioning.
And then we have Rico. Rico
is the, you know, he was a kid in the neighborhood, and Nathaniel kind of took him under his wing, and Rico is, he's probably the most conservative of all the characters in terms of he's, you know, he's a family man. He loves what he does. He has kind of a cultural difference. He's, you know, he's not that repressed wasp. So death doesn't freak him out as much. And he's, I guess, you know, sometimes if I was looking at this in Shakespearean terms, and I'm not in any way saying that it's comparable to Shakespeare, but he's sort of like the bastard son, even though he's not really related. You know, he's Edmund in King Lear.
And lastly on the list is Keith.
Keith is a good guy who, for whatever reasons, he and David had a chemistry, and he ended up with this crazy, repressed, guilt-ridden, white undertaker. But Keith in a lot of ways was the rock that allowed David to be all, you know, to sort of fall apart. And especially after what happened to David in season 4 when he was abducted and tormented by that crazy crackhead, I think Keith was just knowing that Keith was there was a big part of David's ability to transcend that.
Okay. Between the first and second seasons, 9/11 happened.
Yes.
Did that affect the show, and where were you that day, and did it affect?
Of course it affected the show. It affected everybody. There was a discussion in the writers' room about whether we should address it in the show, and I finally nixed that idea because it was going to be 8 or 9 months after it had happened, and I didn't want it to. I felt like at that point it just wouldn't feel right. It would indicate that the show was taking place in the past. And I also knew that by that time, it would have been addressed by so many other shows. I just said, I don't think we need it. I don't think we need it. But it certainly, I think 9/11 was a moment that affected Americans and the American psyche in a way that made people more conscious of mortality. You know, like, oh, we can be attacked. We're vulnerable. You know.
All right, and then 6 Feet Under ends. Can you talk a little bit about the finale? And
I wish I could remember which one of the writers I worked with came up with the idea of everybody dying, because it wasn't me. But it just made such perfect sense. And, you know, it was very emotional because I think the fact that Nate died a few episodes from the end, everybody got to sort of grieve the end of the show. On camera, behind camera. I know I cried when I wrote the finale, and Claire was driving that Prius, and people were dying. I was crying. I was up in Arrowhead with 2 of my dogs, and they were staring at me like, what's wrong with you? What? We all cried. I got choked up. Several scenes in shooting the finale. The scene where they're at dinner and they go around the table and they're talking about Nate. I got choked up with that. But it was time. It was time for the show to end. You know, 63 episodes, that's a lot. 63 hours of that story, that's plenty.
And over the course of the series, you were personally nominated for 6 Emmys, and in 2002, you won an Outstanding Director Emmy. So what did that mean to you to win an Emmy Award?
You know, the awards are nice. They're nice for your ego, but I'm not comfortable being in the spotlight. I like being behind the scenes. It's always really nerve-wracking. And I remember I won I was very nervous. I was way more nervous at the Emmys than I was at the Oscars. Of course, at the Oscars, I had a flask of scotch in my pocket. I did not have that at the Emmys. And Aaron Sorkin was sitting behind me, and he grabbed me, and he hugged me and spun me around, and I was like disoriented from that. And I remember just being up on stage and hoping that my voice wasn't shaking. It's, in a lot of ways, it's humiliating, because it's just like, you know, all the actors win and they get up and everybody is so clever and they say the smartest things and they seem really at ease, and then I get up there and I just feel like I'm such an inarticulate dork. It's nice. It looks nice on my shelf at home. Ultimately, it's not why. It's not what the work is about. So does it mean anything beyond it's nice to be recognized by your peers? I don't think so, you know.
And what do you think is the legacy of 6 Feet Under?
I don't know. I find those questions so difficult. That's for the academics. I have books in my office, people who've written essays about 6 Feet Under, and they send them to me, and I don't read them. I feel like I did the work. The work is there. However that people respond to it, whatever it means to people, that's out of my hands. And I don't know what the legacy is. I wouldn't even know how to begin to answer that question.
Fair enough. So let's move on to True Blood.
Yes.
Can you describe how that series came about?
You know, I've lived in Los Angeles for 15 years, and I still can't figure out how long it's going to take me to get from one place to another. I had an appointment with a dentist in the Valley for a root canal. It was some dentist I'd never been to. And I showed up 30 minutes early. So I had a half hour to kill, and there was a Barnes & Noble across the street. I was wandering up and down the aisles. I saw this little book. I don't know why I picked it up. I picked it up. It was Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris, and the tagline is, "Maybe having a vampire for a boyfriend isn't such a bright idea," which made me laugh. I bought it. It's like this thick. I read it, and I couldn't put it down. I'm from the South. Charlaine's from the South. It had a very authentic Southern feel to it, and it was this great mix of drama and comedy and horror and sex and violence and social commentary. And she walked this line that was so incredibly entertaining that I couldn't put the book down. There were 3 more books available at that time. I got them on Amazon, and I read them like crack. And right around book 4, I said, I think this would make a great TV show. And I called my agent. We tried to get in touch with Charlaine. It was under option to some movie guy. I was like, okay, well, you know, if the option ever runs out, let me know. I went and directed a movie, I wrote a play, and then it turned out that the options, the rights were available, and I spoke to Charlaine. I said, this is what I love about your work. This is what I would really fight to maintain. I think it should be a TV show and not a movie. It's too big for a movie, and I would love to do it. And she agreed, and I wrote a pilot and 2 more episodes just to give HBO a sense of what it would be like, and they agreed to produce it. And we shot it, and then I didn't hear from them for like 3 months. It was totally different from the 6 Feet Under experience, but they finally decided to go ahead with it, and they wanted to recast one of the roles, and we did that, and then, you know, we did the first season.
And tell us what the premise of the show is.
The show takes place in a world where vampires have made their existence known to humans. They've come out of the coffin, so to speak, and they're sort of struggling for equal rights, assimilation, but they're also dangerous exotic creatures. There's a whole group of people called fangbangers who want to get bitten or have sex with vampires. Vampire blood is a very potent drug, so vampires are being stalked and drained for their blood. And this is all seen through the eyes of a very, very small town in Louisiana called Bontemps, where our characters live. And the main character is Sookie Stackhouse. She's a waitress who is telepathic because she has fairy blood. And she meets a vampire, and it's the first man she's ever met where she can't hear his thoughts. And it allows her to relax and be herself, and they have a love affair. And it goes from there.
Excellent. And what is your role on the show, and how has it evolved at all, or has it always been the same?
It's the same. I created the show, and I didn't create the characters of the world. There was source material, the books by Charlaine Harris, but I created the show, and I'm the executive producer, showrunner. It's pretty much exactly what I did on 6 Feet Under. And
were you always interested in writing about the supernatural, or is it just because you found these books?
The books. I had never read, I didn't even know Twilight existed. I had never read an Anne Rice book. I never saw an episode of Buffy until recently. So I was not, it wasn't like, oh my God, I want to do a show about vampires. I think I was looking to do something different, you know. I had peered into the abyss with six Feet Under for 5 years. I didn't necessarily want to do something that heavy or that existential. I wanted to have fun. And when I read this book, I thought, I can see this show. It's a show for adults. It's fun. It's popcorn. It's got some interesting things to say, but ultimately it's pure entertainment. And I think that's where I want to go right now.
And how does the show differ from the books?
Well, the books are all narrated by Sookie, so the books are all Sookie's story. The show is a huge ensemble piece. There's 6 or 7 major characters and then 10 or 11 secondary characters, and we really, you know, by now they're all contractually guaranteed every single episode, so we really try to tell the story of all these people in this town. At the same time, we're trying to keep it all together. So it's different in that regard, and we've taken some liberties with the story.
What's the reaction from fans of the book when you take liberties, when you stray too far from the books?
I know there are people who refer to themselves as book bangers, and they don't like the show. They think the books are better. You know, I hear from the other writers I work with what people are posting on the boards. I don't go on the boards.
And is Charlaine involved in the series at all?
She's not officially involved. I mean, she comes out for the premiere every year, and she's very sweet, and she and I have a really good relationship. You know, she said you have to look at them as 2 separate things. They're 2 separate things, the show and the books. She says, I don't tell Alan how to run his show, and he doesn't tell me how to write my books. And she's delightful. I think the experience has been mutually beneficial for both of us, so that there's no, I don't think there's any judgment or animosity one way or the other.
Do you know where she's heading with the books in the future?
I don't. I know that she's written 10 of them. She plans to write 13 of them. I don't know where she's heading.
So you don't have any contractual obligations to stick to her storylines or... Okay, great. And again, you know, you're such an auteur, you've created other worlds on their own. Why create her world? What drew you to it?
It spoke to me. It felt recognizable. Not in the sense of vampires and stuff, but the people and the smallness of the town. It took me back to my roots. It took me back to when I was a kid, when I would go to Blairsville, Georgia, which is this tiny little town in the mountains where my grandfather lived. It took me back to that place that has pretty much all disappeared as at least where I grew up in Metro Atlanta has become just like every other place in America, with a Best Buy and Walmart, and you know, the sense of really true individual regional identity I really responded to. And I liked the characters. I liked the world. It just felt fun. But obviously it jibed with my own voice in a way, because otherwise I don't think I would have responded to it.
And what do you think it is about the vampire culture that's such a phenomenon now?
No, I have no idea. I can say I think part of it is the immortality. Part of it is they're creatures of the night. They're the ultimate bad boys or bad girls. They're dangerous. I think a lot of women who read this type of fiction, and they are at their heart romance novels. There's that idea of if only he had the love of a good woman, I could tame the beast in him. I also think there's something really powerful about the idea of being taken by a creature, that because it's so outside of the realm of possibility, people can let themselves sort of fantasize about that in a way they wouldn't fantasize about really being taken by somebody stronger than themselves, because that's rape and nobody wants to be raped. But rape fantasies are not uncommon. And I think, especially for whatever reason in the last 20 years, vampires have become really handsome and really hot and sexy. And there's that brooding, misunderstood, tortured, hot, bad boy, lives only at night, rock star thing,
So can you talk?
And they're sexy. Vampires are sex. I mean, obviously, vampires really sort of became part of pop culture as a metaphor for sex at a time when sex couldn't really be, depicted or acknowledged.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the writing process on the show?
The writing process is different from 6 Feet Under only in that there's source material. We come in at the beginning of each season. We have a book. We go through the book. This is what we like. This is what we don't like. This is what we'll keep. This is what we'll veer from. What are we going to do with all these other characters who don't have story in this book? And we very roughly map out where we're going towards the end of the season. And then we start breaking individual stories. Because no matter how much I've learned that no matter how much you map out where the season's going to go, it's always going to change. So rather than get really specific in each of these 12 episodes, we'll say somewhere around this episode, this person will find out about this, and she'll get these people, and they'll go to, and there will be a big showdown in episode 12. And now let's start doing the individual ones.
And there have been varying reports and theories about whether the vampire on the show is a metaphor for gay people. Is
right.
that what's your take on that?
My take is that the vampire is not a metaphor for gay people. I'm gay myself. I'm not going to say gay people are blood-sucking monsters. I think part of what I enjoyed about the book was the vampire. There was people that were striving for vampire rights amendment, and there were questions of vampire marriage and stuff like that. I think because we live in a time where the gay and lesbian community is struggling for equal rights in a very visible way, it's very easy to say, oh, well, the vampires are supposed to be gays and lesbians. If the show was 50 years ago, it would be African Americans. If it was 100 years ago, it would be women. There are times, of course, where it looks like you play, for me, that's just sort of window dressing, and you play the fun of having a spokesperson on TV explaining why vampires should be given, equal rights and stuff like that. But it's certainly not a conscious choice, and I don't think it's one that really holds up if you look at it too closely.
And what does the show say about life in the South?
I think the show says about life in general that life is much more primal than perhaps we want it to be, that we all have primal urges and desires, and we all have monsters living inside of us. And I think because it's in the South, it has a sort of swampy, small town, narrow-minded, bigoted aspect to some of the characters that I don't know that it says that much about life in the South. I think it says more about the primal nature of being a living, breathing creature of meat and bones, and our sort of fears and desires related to that.
And you're once again touching on the theme of mortality. Do you look at it differently?
Very different. It's differently because, in this show we have people who don't ever die, so it's very different. It's like a fantasy world. It's not really based in reality. It's like dream world. It's like a Freudian, Jungian playground. It doesn't really have a lot to do with the real issues of how one makes peace with one's own mortality.
And do you face any kind of censorship on the show?
I've never actually had any sort of censorship. I mean, there was that one instance where they asked if we could not be quite so graphic, and Tara ripping Franklin Mott's neck out with her teeth. But then there was another instance where, when Marianne was overseeing and sort of creating this orgy out in the woods, they were like, can we see a little more skin? Can it be a little hotter? Right now it's not quite hot enough. I think those are the only censorship things. I mean, we're never going to show... people say the show is pornography. I think pornography is about body parts, specifically vaginas and penises. We're never going to show that. For me, the show is about the characters and their emotions, and it's romance. It's it's what a lot of people call lady porn, and of course we're going to show romance, and part of the whole nature of the primal soup of sex and death and supernatural and whatever is sex, and making love and those primal urges and desires. So of course we're going to show that, but I don't think we've ever done it in a way that was prurient or specifically body part focused, and none of those actors are going to show those parts of themselves anyway, so we're never going to go there. Not that I would even want to, because once you do that, it becomes all about that.
Is there a character that you prefer writing for?
I love writing for Lafayette. I love writing for Jason. I love writing for all of them, but I have to say those two are particularly fun. But I do love writing for all the characters.
And let's talk a little bit about the casting process. Do you remember who you cast first and how that process
Actually,
went?
the first person we cast was Ryan, because I saw him in a movie, Flicka, where he played the dim, hot brother of the heroine. And I was like, well, that's Jason, And I think my only question is, are you going to be comfortable depicting the kind of sexuality? Because this guy he's kind of a sex addict. He's like one of those overgrown boys whose only sense of being special comes from how many conquests he has. And he said, yeah, absolutely. I believe the second person we cast was... I think we cast a bunch of people all at once. Anna aggressively pursued this, and thank God she did. I think we cast Anna and Sam and not Tara. I don't remember.
That's fine.
I don't remember.
Let's do what we did before and go through each character and just talk a little bit about, describe them and how they've evolved over the seasons.
Okay.
So first is Suki.
Suki is a person who grew up with the ability to hear other people's thoughts, which turned her into kind of a strange, odd little bird. And then she meets a vampire and she can't hear his thoughts, and she can sort of be herself. And Anna and I joked that over the course of the first season, Sookie went from being an innocent virgin to being a murdering whore. Over the course of the show, she has certainly claimed her power. And she actually has supernatural power due to her fairy DNA. I think she's got a strong moral center. She wants to do the right thing. She's very emotional. She's had a hard life, and but she's not gonna be a victim.
And next is Bill.
Bill is a guy who was turned against his will, and he lost everything he ever cared about. He's never been fully comfortable embracing his vampire nature 100%. He wants to retain his humanity. And when he met Sookie, he felt like he had been given a second chance at happiness in life. And unfortunately, he met her because he'd been sent to seduce her for the Queen of Louisiana, and she found that out, and things went awry. But he still loves her, and he still wants to be a good guy.
How about Eric?
Eric doesn't really want to be a good guy. Eric's probably Eric and Pam are probably the most comfortable in their vampire skin. Eric was a warrior. Eric was a cocky young prince whose family was murdered, and then he went off to avenge it, and then he was dying and made vampire. And I think Eric's definitely got a heart, but I think he is not even remotely sentimental. And he doesn't, it's not until he meets Sookie that he feels like humans are really anything to be taken in any other way than food or sex. But something about her touches something about him. And then, of course, in the most recent season, he's kind of a different version of himself. He's taken through witchcraft back to a sort of younger, more innocent, more vulnerable side of himself, which, of course, is what Sookie falls in love with. But that's not the real Eric.
How about Sam?
Sam, all these characters, they seem to be orphans in one way or another. Sam is a guy who was adopted as a baby, and when he shapeshifted at age 15, his parents abandoned him. They moved away. So he was on his own at a very early age. Sam has a hard time trusting people, but he's a good guy, but he's capable of some bad shit. He's killed. And he's now just trying to make a life for himself and do the right thing,
Do you have any favorite episodes of True Blood?
Of True Blood?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this. I love the episode where we see Bill being made, and we go back to the Civil War, and we see how he became vampire. I love the episode where Godric meets the sun. I love the episode where Marianne throws a birthday party for Tara, and it turns into a Dionysian, bacchanalian excess, party of excess. I love that one. I love all the flashbacks to Eric as a Viking. Let's see. This year I love the episode where it hasn't aired yet, but there's an episode where they're all trapped inside Moon Goddess, and the vampires are outside with weapons. That I think is a really, really strong, really, really fun episode. I like all the episodes, but those are the ones that jump to mind immediately. I love the episode where Tommy skinwalks as Sam. Yeah.
And you also wrote and produced 6 mini episodes that sort of teased the season 3. So how did those come about, and why do you think they were important to do?
HBO asked if we would be open to the idea of doing minisodes, and I said yeah. And then they took a crack at them, and I looked at what they gave us, and I said, I think I should write these because I know the show and I know what to do, and so I wrote them. In terms of producing, I really wasn't on the stage when they were shot because they were all being shot by directors that are pretty much part of our family now, and I knew that everything would be okay. But I was involved in editing, you know.
And how important of a role do you think the internet plays in the series?
I don't know. I think the internet was very important in the launch of the series. I know that Jessica has a blog that my assistant Gianna writes and does a wonderful job with that people go to. I know that in terms of people, fans of the show and posting on the boards and that kind of stuff, I don't pay any attention to that. I know that we have created fake websites to sort of extend the reality of the show. There's a Fellowship of the Sun website. There's an American Vampire League website. This year there's a vamps.kill.com, vamps-kill.com website. But I think that's all just like added stuff. I think the show could exist without the internet. I mean, we also have comic books, which are part of the canon. I'm learning these genre terms now, which are great, but I think ultimately the show is the show. You know?
And you just got picked up for a 5th season. Congratulations.
Yes.
Can you
Thank
tease
you.
anything?
Can I tease anything? We are definitely going to get under the surface of the vampire hierarchy. We're going to get into the authority and see what that is and what it means. And that's some fun. That's some fun. It'll be going on in season 5.
And what other, now we're just going to wrap up.
Okay.
10 minutes. What other current projects do you have going on?
My company is overseeing a show called Banshee, which is going to go at Cinemax, that was written by Jonathan Tropper and David Schickler, it's a real sort of pulpy, fun noir series set in Pennsylvania in Amish country. And they've written 3 episodes, and it's a really good show. I think we're going to start shooting that in spring of 2012, and I'm excited about that. My company has a lot of other shows in development at HBO, but nothing that's going, nothing at the point for me to talk about. We are producing a TV movie based on the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks with Oprah's company, which I'm excited about. And I've got some movies I'm trying to put together, but it's so hard. It's so hard to get a movie done right now if it's not a comic book movie or a gross out comedy. But I'm not going to stop trying.
What do you think is the key to creating a successful TV series?
I don't think there's any one key. I think there's a lot of elements that have to come together. But if I had to pick one, I would say characters that people want to spend time with, characters that people are going to invest in, characters that people are going to care about what happens to them. And that's a function, I mean, that's the result of both writing and casting. And hopefully those two can meld in a way that people want to tune in each week to see what happens to these people. I think no matter how interesting the story is, if we don't care about the people, we're not going to tune in. You know, I always say that if True Blood was a presidential campaign, we would have a sign in the writer's room that said, "It's the emotions, stupid," because you can come up with as many outlandish vampire, werewolf, pyrotechnics, but unless you care about these people, then you're not going. Then it's just going to be meaningless. So I would say you gotta have people that you care about in the show.
And do you have advice for someone starting out as a television writer / producer?
My advice for somebody starting out on TV is write the show that you would watch. Write the show that you would want to see. At the very least, you'll have a nice writing sample. My advice may be the exact wrong advice for somebody, but I know that every time I've tried to sort of look at the marketplace and say, well, I think there's an audience for this, or I think that this is something that could sell, I have failed miserably. I have been successful when I wrote things that are things that I really cared about, stories that I felt like I would watch, I would get invested in. And my second thing would be, don't wait for permission. Don't wait for somebody to say you can do it. Get a camera, get a flip camera, get a D7 camera, start shooting your own stuff, make your own stuff. You don't have to wait for people to give you permission. What you want to do is to develop your voice. And the best way to do that is to do it on your own. That would be my advice.
Excellent. And if you had to pick one thing, what would be the highlight of your career so far?
The highlight of my career. You know, I don't know. I don't know what that would be. I don't think in those terms. I think just the fact that I get to do what I do feels like the biggest gift that I could ever hope for. You know, the fact that through some combination of hard work and perseverance and luck, I have stumbled into this position where I can really make stuff that I would watch, and that I have a really good time doing, and working with such amazing people. That's the high point, and I've been lucky enough for that to kind of be an ongoing thing, and I hope it continues.
And where do you see yourself in 10 years?
10 years, I'll be 64. I won't be running a TV show, I can tell you that. I don't know. I would like to be able to continue to work in different mediums, television, film, theater. But I would like to have a less stressful existence, you know? But I don't know. I don't know where I'll be in 10 years. I don't know.
Well, we hope you'll be making great TV shows.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
That's all we have in this.
Okay.
Karen? No, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
Really fascinating.
I hope I didn't say anything really stupid or pretentious, but
not at all.
if I
we
did,
look forward to part 2.
There it is.